He was once the man who had it all: wealth, power, prestige. But in a quiet hospital room, kneeling with tears soaking into the sweater of the woman who once cleaned his floors, Daniel Mercer finally learned what it meant to feel human again. Daniel had built empires but couldn't hold a heartbeat steady without her. Sienna wasn't just a maid. She was the woman who saved him, healed him, and unknowingly gave him the one thing he'd never dared to dream of: a family. When the person you love has hidden pain as deep as your own, how do you build something real together? And what happens when the woman who gave you life gives you 3 more? Would you call that fate? Or a miracle? Before we begin this beautiful and powerful journey, tell me, would you forgive someone who risked everything to save you, even if they came from a world you once overlooked? Drop your thoughts below, hit the like button, and subscribe if you believe love can come from the most unexpected places. Now let's begin. The sun had barely begun its climb over the jagged skyline when Daniel Mercer stood before the window of his penthouse office, unmoving. Beneath his fingers, the glass felt chilled, but not as cold as the silence in his chest. 38 floors above a waking city, Daniel's world was success, brilliant, demanding, and hollow. He was the CEO of Aster Technologies, a software titan with global reach and billion-dollar evaluations. If you searched his name, you'd find glossy magazine covers, interviews laced with buzzwords, and TED Talks on innovation. But none of that reflected the man who now stood in stillness, watching shadows fade across concrete giants. Behind him, 2 phones blinked for attention. His smartwatch buzzed with calendar updates. He didn't turn. Today, something unexplainable settled in him. An unfamiliar ache, a yearning. Daniel had spent his life in control. From the day he was old enough to wear a tailored suit, he'd been taught to lead, to conquer, to dominate. His father, Arthur Mercer, was legendary in both business and intimidation. The man carried power like a cloak, his words clipped and final. "Emotion is liability," Arthur once said. The boardroom doesn't run on feelings, it runs on facts. So Daniel grew up believing emotions were best kept locked away, stored in vaults no one had the key to. His mother, Celeste, tried to offer warmth in her own distant way. She brought him books, classical music, and brief kisses on his temple, but she never lingered long. Theirs was a home of curated beauty, not lived-in love. The mansion echoed with quiet dinners, separate schedules, and antique furniture that no one dared sit on. As a boy, Daniel learned to sit straight, speak with precision, and never cry, especially not in front of Arthur. By 16, Daniel was a prodigy. By 28, a multi-millionaire. And by 38, the sole force behind one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the world. He had investments in quantum computing, AI, and green energy. His empire reached across continents. But he couldn't remember the last time someone asked him how he was feeling, and meant it. His relationships mirrored his business model: efficient, goal-oriented, and temporary. He dated elegant women who dressed for galas and spoke in curated sound bites. He once came close to settling down. Her name was Karina, a publicist with sharp eyes and a soft smile. For 3 years she stayed, waiting for the man beneath the CEO to emerge. He never did. On the night she left, it rained. She stood at his doorway in a long coat and told him, "Loving you feels like reading a beautiful novel where the pages are glued shut." He had watched her go, arms crossed. "You're being dramatic," he'd said then. But long after the elevator doors closed, her words echoed in him. Back in his office now, Daniel blinked, the memory jolting him. He turned from the window and walked toward his desk. A black leather chair awaited him, the one custom-made to support his spine through endless hours of performance. Yet, he didn't sit. Instead, he pressed a hand to his chest. A tightness was there again, just beneath the ribs. It had started subtly a few weeks ago. A flutter, a fatigue he couldn't explain. He'd blamed it on jet lag, caffeine, or stress. But now, the tension grew. He forced a breath. Not now. Not today. He had meetings, memos to sign, a call with the Singapore office. Everything was scheduled, timed, and organized to the minute. But when he stepped into the shower later that morning, the warm water hit his back like 1,000 needles. He gripped the marble counter as the world tilted, his vision blurred. A sharp pain exploded across his chest, like lightning. He crumpled to the floor. For a terrifying second, there was only silence. Then, footsteps, a cry, the shatter of a porcelain cup hitting tile. "Sir," that voice. He felt hands, urgent, trembling, pressing his chest. Another voice, panicked, barked into a phone. Yes, he's not breathing. I need an ambulance right now. Then, darkness. When Daniel opened his eyes, he was in a hospital bed. Monitors beeped in steady rhythm. A tube ran from his arm. His chest ached. He tried to speak, but only managed to croak. Then he saw her. Sienna. She was seated at his side, a cardigan pulled tight around her, a medical magazine folded in her lap. Her eyes widened when she saw him stir. "You're awake," she whispered, standing quickly. "Don't move. The nurse said to call them the moment you opened your eyes." His voice broke. You found me." She nodded. "You didn't show up for your 9 a.m. meeting. I had a bad feeling. I found you on the bathroom floor." The memory struck like a blade. "You called for help," he murmured. Sienna hesitated. "I did more than that. You weren't breathing. I started CPR. I didn't know what else to do." He turned his head slowly. "You saved my life." She lowered her gaze, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I was just doing what anyone would." But Daniel knew better. Most people wouldn't have known what to do. Most would have panicked or waited. She didn't. The doctors later confirmed it. Without her quick action, he wouldn't have made it. Daniel lay still that night, staring at the ceiling. A maid, a woman who quietly folded his laundry and arranged his schedule, had seen him, touched his fragile body, and breathed life into it. Something inside him cracked. It wasn't just his heart. It was the shell he had built around himself. The false security of being untouchable. She had seen him at his weakest, and she had chosen to stay. That moment changed everything. The following morning, the world looked different to Daniel Mercer. Still wrapped in hospital sheets, he stared through the window at the pink hue of dawn and felt like a stranger in his own life. The heart monitor hummed beside him, a mechanical reminder that time hadn't stopped just because his life had. Outside, business continued. He knew it. Somewhere, boardrooms buzzed with ideas, phones buzzed with news, his inbox pulsed with unread messages. But here in this quiet room, none of it mattered. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. The door creaked open, and there she was again. Sienna. She carried a thermos in one hand and a brown paper bag in the other. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, and her face wore a calm he had never noticed before. Not the calm of someone paid to smile, but something more peaceful, grounded, human. "You didn't eat dinner last night," she said softly, setting the items down on the side table. "I thought you might want something familiar." Daniel blinked. "You're still here?" Sienna gave a faint smile. "I promised the nurse I'd come back this morning. You slept through the night, finally." He tried to sit up. Pain tugged at his chest. She moved quickly, adjusting the pillows behind him with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. "Take it slow," she whispered. He looked at her hands, steady, warm, unafraid. "I'm not used to needing help." "I know," she replied, eyes meeting his. "But right now, it's okay to need someone." The vulnerability in his chest ached more than the physical pain. She poured tea into a disposable cup and placed it in his hands. Its aroma, lemony, herbal, was comforting. "Thé de limon," she said with a small smile. "My father made it for me whenever I had a fever. I always thought it tasted like kindness." Daniel stared at the cup. "Thank you." It was just tea. But for a man who hadn't had a real conversation outside of work in months, it felt like a revelation. Back home, Daniel was discharged under strict instructions: rest, no work, low stress. He had no idea what to do with himself. The penthouse, once a fortress of solitude and order, now felt like a hollow shell. The marble floors echoed. The glass walls offered no warmth. Everything was polished, expensive, and utterly lifeless. But every morning, Sienna arrived. Not in silence anymore, but with gentle presence. She moved through the house with quiet confidence, making soups from scratch, leaving post-it notes reminding him to hydrate, changing the bedsheets even when he insisted it wasn't necessary. One afternoon, he walked into the kitchen and found her quietly humming as she stirred a pot of stew. He paused in the doorway, listening. The melody was old, something nostalgic, something comforting. It wasn't the kind of song you heard on playlists. It was a lullaby from a different life, passed down generations. She looked up, surprised. "I didn't hear you come in. I didn't want to interrupt," he said quietly. "That song, it's beautiful." Sienna smiled. "My grandmother sang it to me when I was little. I guess I carry it with me now." Daniel sat at the kitchen island and watched her. For the first time, he saw her not as the housekeeper or the woman who had saved his life, but as a person. A person with a past, a family, a story, and he wanted to know all of it. Over the following weeks, a strange comfort settled between them. In the mornings, she would sit on the edge of his bed with tea and warm food. They would talk, at first about the weather, then about books, memories, even dreams. Daniel, who once calculated every word for effect, now found himself speaking freely. He told her things he hadn't even told Karina, stories from childhood, quiet fears, even how sometimes, when the city lights flickered outside his window at night, he wondered if anyone would miss him if he disappeared. Sienna didn't flinch. She listened. Then she shared, too. She spoke of Monterey, her siblings, and the sacrifices she made to keep them in school. She had been more than just a housekeeper. She had been their surrogate mother after her parents died. She had survived a long illness 5 years ago, one that left scars the doctors couldn't see. "They told me I might never have children," she admitted one evening, voice barely above a whisper. "I cried for weeks. Then I told myself, I can still mother others in different ways. I didn't stop living." Daniel sat in silence. Her honesty moved something in him. "You're braver than I've ever been." She looked up, blinking. "I'm just doing what life asked of me." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He walked through his penthouse, past the conference calls he'd missed and the reports still unopened. He paused outside the guest room where Sienna now stayed during the week. He listened to the stillness inside. For the first time in years, that silence didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibility. Their bond grew without declaration. Sienna never asked for attention, but Daniel gave it anyway. He found himself waiting for her voice in the morning. He made excuses to sit at the kitchen table while she worked. He lingered near the doorway, just to hear her hum. One weekend, he offered to drive her to her apartment. They didn't talk much on the way, but the silence wasn't awkward. It was calm, safe. Outside her building, she reached for the door handle. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." He looked at her for a long moment. "You can call me Daniel." She paused, then smiled. "Okay." Daniel. It was the first time in years he felt like the name actually belonged to him. She stepped out of the car, but before closing the door, she turned back. "Take your vitamins. And rest. That's an order." He chuckled. "Yes, ma'am." That night, he couldn't stop thinking about her. One Thursday evening, he invited her to dinner, not as his employee but as his guest. They sat across from each other in the penthouse kitchen, the lights dimmed, a single candle flickering between them. She wore a simple navy blue dress. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. He had never seen her like this, still humble, still herself, but radiating something different, something powerful. "Do you ever think about doing something else?" Daniel asked after they finished dessert. She tilted her head. "What do you mean? You said you wanted to become a nurse." She nodded, her expression wistful. "I did. But it's expensive, and I couldn't leave my siblings behind." Daniel's eyes didn't leave hers. "You still can—" Her brows furrowed. "Daniel, that part of my life is over." "No," he said softly. "It's just beginning." She looked away, blinking hard. "Let me help," he said gently. "You've already saved my life. Let me do something for yours." Sienna's voice cracked. "You don't owe me anything." "It's not about owing," he replied. "It's about caring." She wiped her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" He took a deep breath. "Because you're the only person who's ever looked at me and seen something worth saving. Hello, my beautiful family. Are you still there? Are you still watching? Are you still listening? Thank you, and I appreciate you. Please, in case you haven't subscribed yet, do well to hit that subscribe button. Thank you, my lovely family. Now, let's continue. It began in small ways. Daniel started waking earlier, not for conference calls, but to catch a few quiet moments in the kitchen while Sienna brewed her morning tea. She didn't speak much at those hours, just gave him a nod, a smile, and a steaming cup of something fragrant. It was a routine that didn't need language. Sometimes she'd leave a tiny surprise for him, handwritten notes tucked beneath the coffee pot, recipes folded next to his tablet, or a quote from a book scrawled on a post-it. "To love and be loved is to feel the sun from both sides." Daniel read those notes like sacred messages. They reminded him of a warmth he never realized he was missing. One Friday, he asked her to join him at a gallery event hosted by one of Astor Technology's major donors. It was formal, polished, very much his world. But he didn't want to go alone. He wanted her there, beside him, not just for support, but because he felt more like himself when she was near. Sienna hesitated. "I don't own anything that fits those kinds of parties." "You don't need anything fancy," he said, almost too quickly. "Just come as you." But the next evening, when she stepped out of the guest room, Daniel's breath caught. She wore a pale ivory dress that shimmered under the light, modest but elegant, paired with simple earrings and her hair tucked into a soft twist. She looked composed, radiant, and for the first time, he truly understood how stunning she was, not because of the dress, but because she wore no pretense. "You look beautiful," he said, voice low. Her cheeks flushed. "Thank you, Daniel." The way she said his name, soft, familiar, did something to him. At the event, she stayed quietly by his side. Colleagues nodded politely, and though some exchanged curious glances, none questioned her presence. She asked thoughtful questions during conversations, smiled graciously, and held her posture with quiet strength. People noticed, but more importantly, Daniel noticed. He wasn't just proud, he was grateful to be standing there beside someone who made him feel seen, not for his money, not for his title, but for who he really was underneath. As they drove home in silence, city lights washing over them through the car windows, Daniel's hand brushed against hers on the center console. She didn't pull away. Back at the penthouse, the air felt heavier. Something was building, an anticipation they both sensed. Sienna moved toward the kitchen to rinse the glasses they'd used earlier, but Daniel stopped her gently by the wrist. "You don't have to clean anything tonight," he whispered. She turned to him slowly. "I don't mind." "I do," he said, his voice unsteady. "Stay." She looked at him, unsure. "Please," he added. She let the sponge slip from her hand. Her fingers trembled slightly. He took her hand and led her to the living room, where soft light from the terrace bathed the space in a calm glow. They sat side by side, neither speaking for a while. Finally, Daniel turned toward her. "There's something I've wanted to say for a while," he admitted. Sienna looked up, silent but open. "I thought I understood what it meant to care about someone. I didn't. Not really. Not until you—" Her breath caught, but she said nothing. "You changed me," he continued. "Every part of my life that was hollow you filled. You didn't ask for anything. You just gave." "I only did what I knew how to do," she said softly. He nodded. "Exactly. And somehow, that was everything." He leaned closer. She didn't move away. "I don't want to spend another day pretending I'm only grateful to you. I'm more than grateful. I think I'm falling in love with you, Sienna." The words hung in the air between them, fragile, vulnerable, real. Sienna blinked rapidly and then smiled, a trembling thing filled with emotion. "You're not alone in that." He touched her cheek gently. Her eyes closed as his thumb brushed beneath her lashes. Then, he kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't polished. It was the kind of kiss that carried months of emotion behind it. Quiet dinners, silent hospital rooms, long glances over soup and spreadsheets. It was everything Daniel had been too afraid to admit. When they finally pulled away, she rested her forehead against his. "You really mean it?" He nodded. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." She smiled, and in that moment, they weren't boss and employee. They were two people who had walked through loneliness and found something rare, companionship that felt like home. After that night, the dynamic between them changed, but never lost its respect. Daniel was cautious, careful not to overwhelm her. He gave her space, but every day they found new ways to be together, not as man and maid, but as two hearts learning to beat in sync. On weekends, he'd accompany her to the grocery store, delighting in the way she explained the difference between ingredients from her culture and the ones he'd always known. She taught him how to make empanadas, guiding his clumsy hands through the dough. She would laugh when he burned the edges. He would tease her when she got too serious about folding the perfect triangle. At night, they would curl on the couch with her grandmother's blanket draped over them. He would read aloud from whatever book she had borrowed from the local library, stumbling over Spanish words she translated with a patient smile. It wasn't passion driven by heat or impulse. It was slow-burning, tender, and certain. One evening, after a long walk along the waterfront, Daniel asked, "Do you think this is real?" Sienna stopped walking. The breeze lifted her hair. "Yes," she said, without hesitation, "but it's also fragile and precious. We have to take care of it." "I will," he promised, "every single day." The next week, Daniel hosted a private dinner for a few close friends and investors. It was his first public appearance since his health scare. He didn't introduce Sienna as his housekeeper. He introduced her as someone who means everything to me. There was a pause, then polite applause. Some smiled. Some exchanged surprised looks, but none of it mattered. What mattered was that she took his hand under the table and held it tight. Later that night, after everyone had left, Daniel stood barefoot in the kitchen, sipping a glass of wine. Sienna joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered against his back. "I wanted to," he replied. "I'm done hiding who you are to me." She smiled into his shirt. "Then let's not hide from anything anymore." The seasons shifted quietly, and with them, so did Daniel's sense of purpose. Gone were the long nights buried in profit projections or pacing over quarterly losses. Now his evenings were spent beside Sienna on the terrace, talking about things that couldn't be charted or calculated. Childhood stories, forgotten dreams, and hopes for a future that once felt out of reach. One such evening, the city lights flickered like distant stars as they sat wrapped in a blanket, watching dusk melt into night. "I used to think I'd never slow down," Daniel murmured, his voice low. "That if I paused, I'd lose everything I worked for." Sienna, nestled against his side, looked up. "And now?" He exhaled. "Now, I feel like I never had anything until you." The words weren't poetic. They were honest, offered not to impress, but to confess. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached for his hand and rested it on her belly. He looked at her, puzzled. "I've been thinking," she said, voice cautious. "Do you ever want children?" Daniel blinked, caught off guard. He'd always told himself children weren't necessary. That legacy was built in earnings and company growth. But now, with her, the question felt different. "I never thought I'd say this," he replied slowly, "but with you, yes, I want that." Sienna's smile faltered. She hesitated before speaking again, her fingers tightening slightly. "Daniel, I need to tell you something." He turned to face her fully. "I was very sick a few years ago," she continued, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Afterwards, my doctor said there was a strong chance I wouldn't be able to carry a child." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel took a moment to process. He reached for her face and gently turned it toward him. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I was scared," she whispered. "Scared that if we ever talked about a future, you might change your mind." Daniel's expression softened. "Sienna, I didn't fall in love with you because you could give me a family. I fell in love with you because you are my family." Tears gathered in her eyes, and she leaned into him. "I don't know what the future holds," she admitted, "but I wanted you to know." "Then let's walk into it together," he said, "no matter what." Weeks passed. Autumn rolled in gently. One morning, Sienna sat on the edge of their bed, hand on her stomach. She had felt off for days, tired, dizzy, unsettled. She brushed it off as stress or the early winter flu. But something gnawed at her, a quiet whisper in her body telling her something had shifted. She found the test in the bottom drawer, the same one Daniel had purchased months ago during a grocery run. "Just in case," he had said with a teasing smile. They'd laughed about it then. Now she held it with trembling hands. The minutes that followed were the longest she had ever known. When the result appeared, she stared at it, unmoving. Pregnant. The word didn't seem real. She paced the room, hand over her mouth. 1,000 thoughts swirled, hope, fear, disbelief. Could it be true? After everything? When Daniel returned home that evening, he found her sitting in the living room, the test gripped in her hand. "Sienna?" he asked, sensing something. She looked up, eyes wide. "Daniel, I'm pregnant." The world froze. He stepped closer, slowly, as if afraid the moment might vanish. "You're sure?" She nodded, voice shaky. "I took 2 more tests, all positive." He dropped to his knees before her, eyes misted. "We're having a baby?" She nodded again. He let out a laugh, disbelieving, joyful, raw. "This is real." Sienna was already crying. "I don't know how, but yes, it's real." Daniel wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "You're my miracle," he whispered. "You always have been." The next day, they visited the doctor. The examination room was silent except for the soft buzz of machines. Sienna's hand clutched Daniel's as the doctor performed the ultrasound. After a few minutes, the physician's brows lifted slightly. She turned the screen toward them. I have something to show you, she said. Daniel and Sienna stared at the monitor. There's not just one heartbeat, the doctor said gently. There are 3. Daniel's mouth fell open. Sienna blinked in disbelief. 3? She gasped. The doctor smiled. Triplets, all strong, all developing beautifully. The word echoed like thunder. Triplets. Daniel slumped into the chair, dazed. He pressed his hands to his mouth, overcome. Sienna squeezed his hand hard. He looked at her, tears streaming down his face. We're having 3 children. She laughed through her own tears. We really are. I need to sit down again, he mumbled, and they both laughed, overwhelmed by the weight of their joy. From that moment, everything changed. The penthouse was no longer a quiet sanctuary for 2. It became a place of preparation. Books on parenting began to fill the shelves. Baby clothes arrived in bundles, tiny onesies, plush blankets, and miniature shoes that Daniel held like fragile jewels. They chose colors for the nursery, soft sage and warm ivory. Sienna taught Daniel lullabies in Spanish, which he hummed under his breath while painting the walls. At night, they would talk to the babies, imagining what each one might be like. A boy who loved puzzles, a girl who adored music, a second boy who was always stealing cookies from the jar. Daniel had never let himself hope like this, not once. But now? He couldn't imagine his life any other way. Sienna's pregnancy progressed with tenderness and caution. Daniel became fiercely protective. Every appointment, every craving, every sudden yawn, he was there. When she couldn't sleep, he sat beside her, rubbing her back gently and whispering encouragements in both languages. One evening, as they lay in bed, Daniel pressed his ear to her belly. I can hear them, he whispered. Sienna laughed. You can't. Maybe not. But I can feel them. He looked up at her, eyes gleaming. Do you know what you've given me? She touched his face. The same thing you gave me, hope. When winter arrived, Daniel made a special call to Sienna's family in Mexico. He spoke in halting but sincere Spanish, telling her siblings about the babies. Miguel and Lena cheered. Their grandmother wept openly, her voice trembling with joy. Thank you for loving my granddaughter, she said softly. I don't know how I lived before her, Daniel replied. The following week, he arranged for her family to join virtually in a private baby shower. From across continents, they shared stories, songs, and laughter. It wasn't a lavish event. It was heartfelt, intimate, and full of love. Even his staff at Astor noticed the transformation. Daniel introduced new wellness programs for employees, paid paternity leave, subsidized childcare, flexible hours. When asked why, he said simply, because families matter more than numbers. One morning, Sienna stood in the nursery, hands on her lower back, admiring the 3 bassinets lined side by side. She turned to find Daniel standing in the doorway, watching her. He stepped forward, placing a kiss on her temple. You've made this place feel alive. She smiled. You helped. He knelt before her and placed a hand on her belly. Are you scared? A little, she admitted. Me too, he whispered. But I've never wanted anything more in my life. And in that quiet moment, with the city lights below and their hearts pressed close, they waited for their miracle to arrive. It happened on a morning bathed in sunlight, the kind of golden haze that makes you believe the world might be good after all. Sienna had been awake since before dawn, shifting restlessly in bed. The babies, so active in the last few weeks, had been unusually still, not silent, just waiting. She sat up slowly, placing a hand on her abdomen. Then came the first sharp ache, followed by another. She breathed through it, calm but alert. Daniel, she whispered. He stirred beside her, groggy, but instinctively on edge. When he looked into her eyes, everything changed. It's time, she said, breath shallow. He leapt up, grabbing the pre-packed bag and calling the hospital. Minutes later, they were en route, Daniel's voice a steady reassurance through every bump and red light. You're doing great, he murmured. We're almost there. Her hand squeezed his, eyes closed. I'm scared, she whispered. I am too, he replied honestly, brushing his lips to her knuckles. But we're going to meet them today. The delivery room was a blur of soft lighting, bustling nurses, and calm instructions. Daniel stood beside her, fully gowned, eyes locked on hers. He couldn't stop touching her forehead, whispering words in her ear, words he didn't even realize he knew. Things like, you're not alone. I'm right here. You've got this. Sienna, breathless and focused, never let go of his hand. Hours passed, the pain rising and receding like waves. But when the time came, she bore down with fierce strength, pushed with everything inside her. Then, a cry. A sharp, vibrant wail that filled the room and sliced through the tension like light through fog. Daniel gasped. "That's our son," the doctor said, lifting a squirming, red-faced baby into view. Daniel's knees nearly buckled. Moments later, another cry. Then a third. 3 voices. 3 lives. Sienna collapsed back into the bed, chest heaving, tears flowing freely. Daniel bent beside her, sobbing without shame. "They're here," he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. "They're really here." In the recovery room, Sienna cradled their daughter, while Daniel held the boys, each wrapped in soft blue and green blankets, eyes blinking slowly, fists curled like tiny stars. He looked between them, awe etched into every corner of his face. "I don't know how to do this," he confessed quietly. Sienna turned to him, eyes kind. "You're already doing it." He kissed the smallest boy's forehead. "I swear to you," he said softly, "I will never let anything take this away from us." And he meant it, because for the first time in his life, Daniel understood love as something not built on performance or expectation, but as a promise. The days that followed were a blur of lullabies, midnight feedings, and diaper changes that left Daniel more exhausted than any all-night negotiation ever had. But he never once complained. He learned how to warm bottles to just the right temperature, how to rock the bassinets with the perfect rhythm, and how to hum tunes that calmed the cries. And when all 3 babies were finally asleep, he would sit beside Sienna, watching her breathe as she dozed, hair tousled, lips parted slightly in peaceful fatigue. "This is my real life," he whispered one night, looking at them all. "This is everything I didn't know I needed." One afternoon, a month later, Daniel held a press conference at Astor Technologies headquarters. Journalists gathered, expecting news on a merger. Instead, he stood before them in an open-collar shirt without a teleprompter and began, 3 years ago, I thought success was measured in numbers, that control equaled power, that feelings made you weak. Then I nearly lost everything." He paused. "I survived not because of luck, but because someone saved me. She saved my life. And then she gave me 3 more reasons to keep living." His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. "Today I want to introduce the policy I should have created a long time ago, one that supports the families behind every desk in this company." He announced new initiatives: 6 months of paid parental leave, mental health days, expanded insurance to cover fertility treatments and high-risk pregnancies. The applause was thunderous. But the moment that followed mattered more. As Daniel stepped off the podium, he found Sienna waiting behind the curtain, holding their daughter. He took the baby in his arms and kissed her temple. "You're changing more than this company," she said. "No," he replied. "You are. I'm just following your lead." Back home, life unfolded in patterns. Diaper changes, burp cloths, pacifiers dropped and recovered. Their apartment had transformed from a minimalist sanctuary into a symphony of pastel-colored chaos. Toys littered the living room floor. Baby swings hummed softly in the corners. And Daniel loved it. Every late-night feeding became a moment of reflection. Every CO, a kind of music. Every cry, a reminder of the fragile, beautiful lives now entrusted to him. One night, unable to sleep, he walked into the nursery. The room was lit only by a soft nightlight. He stood quietly, taking it all in. 3 bassinets, 3 sleeping babies. He walked over, adjusting a blanket here, tucking in a tiny hand there. Then he sat in the rocking chair, holding his daughter against his chest. She stirred briefly, then settled into sleep. Daniel looked out the window at the sleeping city. "I used to think legacy meant buildings and billions," he whispered to her. "But it's this. You, your brothers, your mother." He swallowed hard. "You're my legacy." Spring came softly. The first family photo was taken in the garden behind the house. Sienna wore a white dress and held their daughter in her arms. Daniel knelt beside her, the twin boys resting against his chest. They all looked slightly disheveled, but endlessly happy. It wasn't polished. It wasn't staged. It was real. A journalist from a family magazine interviewed them later that month, asking Daniel what had changed most about his life. He smiled and said, "Everything. But mostly, me." Later that week, Daniel brought Sienna a small box wrapped in silver. She raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a gold necklace. 3 tiny charms dangling from the chain. Each charm was engraved with an initial, M, L, and Miguel, Lena, and the name they had chosen together for their daughter, Amora. Sienna blinked through her tears, too moved to speak. Daniel took her hand. I want you to know, every day with you, every moment with our children, it's not something I take for granted. She leaned into him, resting her head on his chest. I still can't believe we made it here. We didn't just make it, he said. We created it. One morning, long after the triplets had fallen asleep and the house was quiet, Daniel stood once again at the window of his penthouse office. But this time, everything was different. He wasn't alone. Sienna stepped behind him, arms wrapping around his waist. Together, they watched the city below stir to life. He turned to her, brushing a hand against her cheek. I used to stand here and feel nothing, he said softly. She met his gaze. And now? Now, I feel everything. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. In the nursery down the hall, a soft cry began. Sienna smiled. That one's yours. He chuckled. Gladly. They walked hand in hand toward the sound, ready to face whatever the day would bring, together. 5 years later, the once silent penthouse was no longer a monument to solitude. It was alive, not just with sound, but with meaning. Finger paintings on the fridge, juice cups left half, full on the counters, and small shoes scattered by the door all told a story far richer than any ledger ever had. Daniel Mercer stood at the edge of the backyard garden, sleeves rolled up, shirt damp with morning dew. A pair of tiny hands tugged at his pant leg. Daddy, said a little voice, we found a ladybug. He turned with a grin. His daughter, Amora, stood with one finger outstretched, proudly displaying the tiny red visitor as if it were a diamond. That's very special, Daniel replied, crouching to her level. You know what ladybugs mean? She shook her head. They bring luck. And we're already the luckiest people in the world. From the swing set nearby, her brothers, Lucas and Mateo, raced in circles, their laughter ringing out like a song that never got old. Daniel watched them, eyes full of warmth. Sienna emerged from the house, carrying a tray of fresh juice and fruit slices. She wore a soft yellow sundress, curls bouncing with every step. Years had passed, but her smile still had the power to make him pause. You're supposed to be resting, he teased as she walked over. I've been resting, she replied, setting the tray down. Now I'm supervising. He wrapped an arm around her waist. You're always supervising, and you're always falling in love, she whispered. Every single day, he answered. They stood for a moment in silence, just watching their children play. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't epic, but it was theirs, and it was perfect. Later that afternoon, Daniel sat on the living room floor surrounded by building blocks, 2 of his kids trying to construct a lopsided tower while the third colored quietly nearby. A faint breeze drifted through the open balcony doors. Sienna walked in with an envelope. It came, she said simply. He looked up, puzzled. My graduation results, she added. He blinked, stood quickly, and took the envelope with reverence. Opening it, he read the letter. Slowly, twice, then looked at her, eyes shining. You did it. She nodded, voice catching. I did. Daniel scooped her into a hug, the letter fluttering to the floor. The triplets cheered, unaware of the milestone, but sensing the joy. You're a nurse, he whispered into her hair. After everything, you made it. I made it because you believed I could, she replied. No, he said. You did it because you never stopped believing in yourself. They held each other for a long time, letting that moment wash over them. That night, the kids were tucked into bed. Laughter had faded into lullabies, and the quiet glow of the moon spilled across the nursery. Daniel sat in the rocking chair watching them sleep. Sienna entered quietly and sat beside him. I was thinking, he began softly, about the first time I saw you. She smiled. When you passed out on the bathroom floor? He chuckled. No, before that. You were checking pantry stocks. You had a pen behind your ear, humming to yourself. I remember thinking, this woman lives like she's never rushed, even when the world is... She leaned her head on his shoulder. I was nervous that day. It was my first month working for you. You didn't show it, he whispered. But I noticed everything. A pause. Then he added, do you think we were meant to end up here? Sienna looked toward their children. I think we were meant to find each other, she said. And then we chose to build something beautiful. The next weekend, Daniel hosted a small garden party. Not for the board, not for shareholders, but for the people who mattered. Friends, neighbors, fellow parents, and the families Sienna had become close to during her nursing program. It was a celebration, not of wealth, but of milestones, of years survived, of love grown. He stood under the arbor, a mora on his hip, and raised a glass. "I used to believe life was something you had to conquer," he said to the small crowd. "That love was optional. That success meant being alone at the top." He paused, holding his daughter close. "But then I learned that love isn't what distracts us from our goals. It's what gives them meaning. And sometimes, the people who save your life don't wear capes. Sometimes, they carry laundry baskets and make lemon tea." The crowd laughed softly. He looked toward Sienna, who stood near the dessert table, cheeks flushed. "This family saved me," he said, voice thick with emotion. "And every day since, they've reminded me that the most important empire I'll ever build is the one within these walls." He lowered his glass and kissed his daughter's temple. The applause wasn't loud, but it was full of love. That evening, as the sun set, Daniel sat alone on the patio. Sienna joined him, placing 2 cups of tea on the small table. "Thé de limon," she said with a smirk. He smiled. "You remembered. I never forget the things that matter." He looked out at the fading sky. "I don't know what I did to deserve this life." "You let yourself be seen," she said simply. "And you stopped running." He turned to her. "You're everything," he whispered. She reached for his hand. "So are you." As darkness settled and their children slept soundly inside, Daniel and Sienna sat in peaceful silence, sipping tea and watching the stars emerge one by one. There was no dramatic music, no final applause. Just a man and woman who had rebuilt their lives from the quiet ruins of loneliness, who had chosen every day to stay. And in that choice, they found everything they had once believed impossible: love, healing, and a future worth believing in. Love has a way of rewriting even the coldest stories. What began as a moment of crisis became a lifetime of meaning for a man who thought he needed no one and a woman who gave everything without asking for a thing in return. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been surprised by love from the most unexpected place? Do you believe people can change? Not just for someone, but because of them? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone who's still waiting to believe in miracles. And if this story touched your heart, if it made you feel something real, don't let it end here. Tap like to let us know you were here. Hit subscribe to join a family of hearts who believe in the power of second chances. And share this story with someone who needs to remember it's never too late to find love, or to become the person you were always meant to be. Because here at Love and Twilights, we don't just tell stories, we tell your story, one heartbeat at a time. See you in the next tale.